just to set some perspective, I wanted to just throw something out there that I use as kind of a bar, and that is the statement: How can you ever reach the horizon if you've never seen it? And just kind of soak that in the sense that the horizon, no matter where you are on the planet, if you're standing on flat ground, the horizon is only 7 miles away. That means any healthy adult can reach their horizon in a day's walk, but you can't get there unless you see it. So the goal of today, and hopefully this conversation, is to see the horizon and start to walk. Understand where we are, understand where we're going, and set off towards that horizon. And surprisingly, if you ever walk to the horizon, it's shocking how quickly you get there. Another thing, just to ground us and give everyone kind of some mind space, just to before we jump into a deep conversation, I want to do something where I'm going to ask you all to just bear with me, be open to the idea. And that is, I want everyone to close their eyes, and I'm going to walk you through just the process, and just go through that process with us all together. So everyone, just close your eyes. Don't look at the camera. Don't worry about how you look. We all look the same with our eyes closed. So just close your eyes, and then I'm going to have you put your hands out to your sides. Wherever you are, just put your hands out to your sides with your eyes closed, and open your palms wide. Open their palms wide, hands out to the sides, eyes closed, and then just take a deep breath. Deep breath, suck it in, the deepest breath that you've taken a day. Just inhale and hold it there. And then as you exhale, I want you to slowly bring your thumb to your middle finger just to the point that they touch. So now your eyes are closed, your hands are out to the side, your thumb and the middle finger are just touching. And I want you to just feel what you feel as your thumb and your middle finger barely touch. And just notice that sensation. What do you feel? What are you noticing as your eyes are closed? And what are you feeling? And then as you feel that middle finger with your thumb, move to your index finger and notice what you feel. And now move down to your ring finger and see what you feel there. And then lastly, just barely touch your pinkies with your thumbs and notice what you feel between your pinkies and your thumbs. And then just take a minute on your own to run your thumb across all four fingers and just notice that sensation, notice what you feel there. Notice and note all the sensations that you felt, everything that you felt. Take a deep breath, suck in that experience, what you feel, what you felt, and then just slowly bat your eyes open and we'll come back to the conversation. So I just want to get a couple people to comment on what you felt doing that. Just feel free to speak up and what did you feel?
I feel calm and peaceful.
Yes, I was noticing my body from my shoulders, elbows on down, and the gentle movements of all of it. And it ultimately is calming, but it obviously affected the whole body more than just my whole body, rather than just the fingers.
There was a sort of tingling sensation between my thumb and my fingers, sort of like feeling energy and life in myself. Slowly, I felt a sense of calm, and that calm allowed me to sort of hone in on that energy I felt between my fingers.
Did anyone feel a difference from finger to finger?
Little bit. For me, I would say I just felt the familiarity of my own hands, my own fingers, kind of things I recognize, and just gave thought to things that I guess that I touch, or that I do with those. And I just happened to have recently had a little bit of a mishap with a table saw while woodworking, so I got a bit of a rough spot on my thumb too. So it just brought thoughts of the activities I do, things I touch physically or not.
Just like a difference in the energy levels between my different fingers. It was kind of weird. It was off-putting at first. I was like, is that supposed to happen? But yeah, it was like the energy was there. And then when I switched down to like my ring finger and my pinky, it was definitely different than, my middle finger, my pointer finger. And so, yeah, just like weird differences in energies.
I mean, I've done energy exercises before, and I understand all that, but I have so much energy in my heart right now that I feel like it was a nice little distraction to try to like focus myself on my fingers, because there's so much exploding in my heart right now. So that was good, because I feel like my heart's about to explode. But it was interesting just to kind of, I did feel, as far as the difference of the fingers, just seeing that one had, I guess, more connection with another. Maybe it's because I use more, but yeah. But I welcome the shift from all the energy engulfing in my heart and transferring to my fingers.
Awesome. So, what you all actually felt, and what you were physically feeling, you felt something inside, and no one mentioned, well, except for the table saw accident. No one really was focusing on the physical thing you were feeling, but what you all actually felt were your fingerprints. Your fingerprints are more unique than your DNA. Identical twins who have the same DNA, and we have a scientist up there, have different fingerprints. And so that little sensation, whether you could tell the difference, is, you just felt, whether it's 10 or 8 or 5, however you want to count it, in a billion, or in 10 billion people that have ever lived, have never felt that sensation of what you just felt. Yet, what you actually felt is your skin, the epidermis of your skin, is 4,000th of an inch thick. It's the thickness, literally the thickness of a medium sheet of paper. And so that one thing that makes you absolutely unique, more unique than your DNA, is paper thin. And yet, though the police, the FBI, when you come into the country, they can identify you by just that paper thin layer of skin on your finger as an individual. What that paper thin layer is also used to do is take you from being literally 1 in 10 billion to being put into groups based on likely light or dark. And those groups are created to serve agendas, justify wars, murder, assign privilege, and open and close doors. You may not even notice the difference, or may not have really been able to. You felt something inside. You didn't. No one said I felt my skin, except for Jason, who actually has something there that's noticeable. That's the unique part of you. It can be used as a justification for so many things. So that said, that paper thin layer that is used to group us for whatever agenda it's used for, that's kind of what has driven us here to this conversation. And whether that paper thin layer has been used to drive you to the top or to the bottom, and whatever you call it, maybe you call that paper thin layer race. That's what I want to start with the conversation today. And also, I want to add one more thought, and that is, the reality is in order for anyone to become rich, someone must become poor. So regardless of how we group things, regardless of whatever it is, for one group or one individual to rise, by definition, there has to be an equal and opposite reaction, the laws of physics, laws of life, whatever it is, for someone else to fall. Hopefully that gives you some perspective, some mind of what we're really discussing literally. And then I want to drive into the context. So that being said, I want to just give everyone an opportunity to introduce yourself. And I'd like you to answer the question, and we'll go through the list here. I'd like you to answer the question of, when you answer the question of what race are you / what ethnicity are you, what is the answer that you give personally? And when you're not limited necessarily to a checkbox, but what is the answer that you give?
White, Norwegian American, grandson of a Norwegian house painter who died of lead poisoning.
My name is Hong, and this is my daughter Katie. And I think we are Asian. We are Chinese.
Katie, you have a different answer?
I would say I'm Asian American.
Dr. Kim?
Black American.
For race, I would say white. For ethnicity, I would probably say Euro American.
I'd say like Caucasian or white.
Yeah, white.
Usually if it's checkbox, it's Caucasian or white. Non-Hispanic, white.
Same.
Jennifer, did you say?
Oh, I said same. I mean,
It's interesting because the DNA tests that you get give you such a different mix than you maybe thought or were taught that you were. When you do those DNA tests, which we've all done, now we're in some kind of database. The countries that we think we're from didn't even exist in the form of them when our people came over, wherever they came from. So to say that we're German, well, Germany didn't exist until 1860 something. So, your German is kind of weird, kind of ridiculous because it didn't exist. So, European American, maybe, yeah.
The question, it's a little bit hard for me. I mean, I guess some people would call me biracial, which is something I'm not really. I guess I don't spend a lot of time contemplating, what my race is. So I'm really not sure how to answer it. But all I could say is in my youth, I used to identify myself as Mexican because I think my skin tone and some other aspects of my culture and ethnicity kind of seem more pronounced. But then later in life, I thought, well, that's only one half. The other half of me is white, whatever that means. But then sometimes I also think, I'm just a good old fashioned American. Like when I worked and traveled abroad for a few years. So I don't know how to answer the question. So I'll leave it at that.
Sore spot for me. But growing up, my mom always told me to put Caucasian, and I later found out that that's probably because of the reason they put Caucasian was when the Indians came over, from the Eastern Indians came over. That's part of my background. They kind of made that category for them because they weren't white. So I did that, but once I became more aware, I was very uncomfortable putting white Caucasian. So I would either write in my own as multi-ethnic or other. And I literally have answered this question 1,000 different times, but I had never put white. If I did, I would put something else, because a lot of different questionnaires will not give you the option to put something other than white, black, or not, Hispanic or Latino. Like some of them give you more, more choices. So I'm very uncomfortable with this, but now I feel fine with this writing in my own and putting multi-ethnic and then just leaving it at that.
Hispanic.
And you have
I'm American.
Angel.
I'm American.
It's interesting that parents and children have different answers for the same question.
Right.
I would say Filipino or Asian American, usually.
So I am confused, of course. I'm black. I'm Seminole Indian. I'm Algonquin Indian. I'm white. I am Baskin Robbins, basically. I'm all 41 flavors thrown into one. I'm American. I'm not black enough to be black. I'm obviously not white. I don't speak a lick of Spanish, so I'm not any kind of Hispanic. But I fall into all categories. Most of my friends are Polynesian or Puerto Rican. My family, Dr. Kemp, Darnell, obviously black. I'm confused, but I'm American. So I usually answer blending for black and Indian, but that just kind of depends on my own personal joke.
When I check boxes, I check the Caucasian box, but I identify as Irish American.
Yeah, this has been interesting. I am black. I often refuse to identify as African American because I'm not from the United States, and I look at African American as more from ethnicity. I'm Bayesian. I'm from Barbados, so if you want to call me Afro Caribbean, that'd be more accurate. But I just call myself black.
I typically call myself white, or if I'm talking about ethnicity, I generally say like Irish and French background with a 1/8 Mexican mixed in.
I usually identify as white American. If somebody wants to get back into ancestry, where my people lived, I usually say Scotch Irish with a lot more Scotch than Irish. But my grandmother would probably, if she heard me say that, she would say, "But your people have been in the United States before it was the United States, so you're American."
Asian, Chinese, Korean American.
Also complicated. I actually try to avoid, similar to others, checking anything. So I'll usually put other, mixed, or biracial. And then if someone asks me that question, I would say I'm Indian and Jewish.
Nationality-wise, American. And ethnically, I would say ADOS or Hebrew Israelite. That's what I would say. Melanated.
I never really put much thought into what race I am until now, actually. So, but I just tell people I'm biracial, so white and half Japanese. But sometimes I call myself Asian American. So, yeah, just depends on the day.
It depends on who's asking the question and what context. So sometimes it's, hey, I'm American and I grew up in San Jose, California, depending on the question. On surveys or census, I normally check other, and it's Arab American, Palestinian, because I don't identify with Middle Eastern being lumped into the Caucasian bucket. And so, yeah, it just depends.
Yeah, like some of the other responses, I think I'm probably similar to J-Mart on this one too, where I don't think about, I don't know, I try to just sort of consider myself first and foremost like a citizen of the world, America. I feel like I'm a human, and like when I give a straightforward response, it's black and white. But if I give a thorough response, it's Irish, English, Danish, African American, Native American, and a little bit of Panamanian.
Very similar to Mike's in that it depends on who's asking and why. And I think typically I would say I would answer the question that I'm American. My family has been in the United States for the generations that I've met here in the United States go back 6 generations. So, and my family's been here longer than that. So very much so American. But obviously the DNA that I have is not rooted here in the United States. So I would also say African American or black. And that gives some sense to where the blood may have come from. black is somewhat cultural. And then similar to Mike, if I'm speaking Spanish and dancing salsa, I just say Dominican because it's a lot easier to explain.
I think it's kind of interesting some of the words that we've been using. I'm just thinking out loud, but you know, you asked the question, what would you identify as your race and or your ethnicity? And I think most people talk to kind of nationality in addition to kind of national heritage. But I think it's interesting to think, at least for me, I'm thinking the concept of race, where that comes from and why. And I think that kind of gets to the point that we're probably going to end up talking about here. Anyway, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm just thinking out loud that race is confusing, and I guess it's a word that I shy away from even engaging in. I think some others on here do too.
I appreciate everyone sharing that. And Jamil, if you're there, we were just going through and sharing, how do you personally identify yourself when someone asks you your race or ethnicity? I think it's interesting to hear that, no one gave the same answer, and it's really difficult to put everyone in a box. Where we started is that each one of us is 100% unique, but everything that we do, we try to put things in boxes. The reason we're here right now is to discuss, race and unity, but what's on the table is Black Lives Matter, systemic racism. So a group of people here in the United States that have seen prejudice throughout multi-hundred-year history. And so what I asked Jonathan White to join us and share, just to ground us with some facts. Because when you ask those questions, when somebody tells me that they're Panamanian, like, what does that mean? And where we are right now, we're discussing black, and I've had people, an Indian woman, dark skinned, much darker than I am, that grew up, or well, not much darker, but darker than I am, that grew up with me, and we rode the school bus together. In Minnesota, everyone on the school bus, which everyone else pretty much was white, they thought we were siblings. And she told me recently, she said, Darnell, everyone thought we were siblings. I thought I was black. Everyone thought I had fake hair because my hair was long and straight. And they wondered how that was the case as, black, even though I was Indian. So she got grouped into that group. That essence is, it's confusing when you boil it down. But what I had to explain to her, she said, well, Darnell, why am I not black if I grew up being told I was black? Well, the issue is that the people making those descriptions don't have more words or don't have more descriptive words, so they limit it. And in Minnesota, it was typically white, or if you weren't clearly black, they would ask, what type of black are you? And the answer would be, well, I'm actually Indian. But to set us off in a direction is that when we ask the question, and to her response, and I'll give a couple of facts, is that in that case, the reality is that the police that arrest people, the jobs that don't hire people, the loans that aren't given to people, when you look at those numbers, those people writing those citations or tickets or putting on those handcuffs, they know the difference, because there's nowhere near as many Indians in prison as there are blacks. And they know the difference. So there is a difference that is clear, even though there may be only a few check boxes. And just one other point that I'd share, which may be on Jonathan's list, is someone asked me, a white woman that I work with, she asked me, she said, Darnell, but aren't white people killed by police as well? And I said, yes. She said, why aren't we talking about that? Why do we only talk about black people? And I said, well, yes, that's a fair point. White people are killed, by police. But then you have to acknowledge the fact that there's 6 times as many, quote, white people in the United States as there are black people. And yet there are 3 times as many black people killed by police as there are white people. which if you do some rough numbers, that means blacks are killed by police 20 times more often than whites. Clearly, yes, it does happen, but there's a clear difference. So with that, I give that over to you, Jonathan, to just set us off on some facts to start off on the conversation so that we have some more color, bad choice of words, to start the conversation, and move forward from a grounded foundation so that we're united in understanding.
Thanks for asking me to be on, Darnell. Darnell actually was my pre-frosh when I was at MIT. So I'd like to think that I was part of the reason why he chose to come to MIT. And I've known him ever since. And I was probably, 97, 98, sometime around then. I'm by no means an expert on any of this, except in the sense that I've lived the experience for most of my life. I think one of the reasons Darnell asked me to be on here is because I write about racial issues and social justice quite often. I am keenly aware of the disparities that occur in communities of color versus other communities. As with many people of color, especially Black people, I often wear the mask. I've been in places where, I'm not a Black man when I'm not in that space. I have to have this duality and be able to project myself in a way that's different than when I'm at home. So I've done a little research, very minor research to get some facts that I want to bring to the table. And hopefully this can help with setting a foundation for our discussion. But we talk about the disparities between the way Blacks are treated in America and whites are treated. And that's not, first of all, let me say that that's not to minimize the effects of racism on Asian communities, on Latino or Latinx communities, on any other communities. But what we see is far greater in this country are stark differences between Blacks, treatment of Blacks, treatments of whites. And that happens in areas from education to the criminal justice system to job related and wealth generation. When we can go back as far as, when slavery ended and we were in Reconstruction. Ironically, this is a fact that most people don't realize. We had more people of color serving in Congress right after the Civil War than we do today. That was, over 100 years ago, 140 something years ago. And we've actually regressed as far as representation in Congress in America. And that's not accidental. A lot of the things that have happened in this country have happened for a purpose. And that sort of, pushes into the issue of policing. When policing first started, the policing that we think of today, it really started as a response to the fact that slave patrols couldn't be had anymore and slavery wasn't legal. Police patrols were a way to continue what was happening with overseers and slave owners and people who served on slave patrols trying to bring them back to their slave owners. It was a way to continue that in a legal context. So if you look at statistics, and again, I'm not an expert, not historian, but if you look at statistics, the rise of the incarceration and the policing of Black bodies actually begins when Jim Crow ends. And Jim Crow, for those who may not know, was a period of time in American history where there were explicit laws on the books that prohibited Blacks from advancing in life, whether it was by education, through their occupation and whatnot. Jim Crow laws were laws such as, in order to vote, you had to be able to tell the voting people how many bubbles were in a bar of soap, or how many gumballs were in a large jar. If you couldn't answer that question, then you weren't allowed to vote. There were laws that were specifically on the books to keep Black people from progressing. And once it became illegal or unconstitutional to have those laws, you find that the American system of justice started targeting Black people in other ways. Vagrancy laws became a big issue after Jim Crow. And vagrancy laws were basically, if you were a vagrant, if you were around on the corner, didn't have work, had nothing to do, you could just be arrested, be picked up and arrested. And if you can imagine, it wasn't easy for Black people to find jobs, right after the Civil War and even leading up into the Civil Rights Movement, because they were discriminated against. So that's an example of how a policy and a law was put into place that directly affected Black people negatively, and the purpose of that law was to affect Black people negatively. So, let's fast forward up into, recent history. And you can see when it comes to drug offenses and the war on drugs, Black people are disproportionately affected. Whites and Blacks typically engage in drugs, whether it be possession or sales, at pretty much the same rates. There was a report by the Human Rights Watch in 2008, and they said that while African Americans, Blacks, make up between 13 and 14% of the U.S. population and are about 14% of monthly drug users, and I'm not going to cite extensive sources and whatnot here, but if you hear something that piques your interest, write it down, do a Google search. I'm sure you'll find all the information you need on it. But while Blacks make up 14% of monthly drug users, about 37% of them are arrested for drug offenses. So 14% of users, but 37% of people arrested for drug offenses are people of color. Blacks are arrested across the country for drug offenses at rates that are between 2 and 11 times higher than that of whites. And again, statistics show that whites and Blacks engage in drug use and drug sales at approximately the same rate. The U.S. Sentencing Commission in 2010 had a report that said that in the federal system, Black offenders receive sentences that are about 10% longer than white offenders for the same crimes. So if you can imagine, two people go to court, same biographical information related to their crimes, but Blacks are doing 10% more time. So if somebody's getting a year in jail, that person, the Black person, is getting 12, 13, 14, 15 months in jail. If somebody's getting 10 years in jail, the Black person is getting an extra year in jail. And all these things sort of tie together, because when you think about the inability to find work, the inability to find sustainable work or work that provides a living wage, that's tied to, one, whether or not you're free and able to find a job, but even after you get out of jail, whether or not you can be hired by a job. And with a lot of companies refusing to hire people who were formerly incarcerated, that multiplies the effect of the policies that the United States has that affect Black people, and how that restricts their ability to live and survive in this country. And this doesn't just happen with Black adults. African American juveniles are about 16% of the population, but they make up 28% of juvenile arrest. 37% of youth in juvenile jails are Black. 58% of youth sent to adult prisons. Now think about that. These are kids younger than 18 years old being sent to adult prisons. 58% of those youth are Black youth. And that's a report from the 2009 Criminal Justice Primer through the Sentencing Project. So that's just as far as jail and incarceration is concerned. But when you think about the best avenue, or one of the best avenues to generate wealth and create a lasting financial history for your family, you're talking about education and jobs, right? Blacks are half as likely to get a job call back, even though their resumes are pretty much similar to, if not better than, their white counterparts. There have been many studies held where they show that somebody with a Black sounding name will be less likely to get a call back than somebody with a white sounding name. And I don't want to carry on too long, but this is just hitting the tip of the iceberg of ways in which Black folks in general across the country are systematically, when we talk about systemic racism, these are systemic ways in which policy and actions by those in power affect the livelihoods of Blacks. So then when we talk about Black criminality, which is a farce in my opinion, the proportion of Black folks that are involved in criminal activity is directly related to the proportion of Black folks who can sustain or obtain a sustainable wage or a living wage for their families. The amount of opportunities those people have educationally or through occupation, that's directly tied to criminality. And that's not just with Black people, that's with poor white folks, poor Indian folks, poor Latino folks. The ability to find a job, to get a great education, to find something that you're good at and be passionate about and see yourself doing that thing. Darnell started us off by talking about being able to walk to the horizon, and you can't walk to the horizon if you can't see it. One of the things that I think has been uncovered over the last 20, 30, 40 years is if you don't see it, you can't be it. So for a very long time, Black people weren't seeing doctors in their communities. They weren't seeing lawyers in their communities. They certainly weren't seeing them on TV. Things like the Cosby Show were unicorns in their day. There wasn't a lot of Black television that was positive. And when you saw Black faces, typically it was on a show like Cops. And again, that was on purpose. So again, I don't want to carry on too long, and I'm definitely willing to engage in more conversation about it. But I just want to sort of touch the tip of the iceberg about ways that in America there are systemic things that have happened, policies that were created that prohibit and inhibit the ability for Black people to advance in this country. And those things had domino effect ramifications in the lives of not only those Black folks, but their descendants. When we talk about the fact that whites, I think in general, for every $1,000, I think it is, that whites have in net worth, Black families have something on the order of like 60 cents. And that difference is a policy difference. Those are laws that were created that assisted white folks in being able to generate wealth. One of the largest ways to obtain generational wealth is home ownership. And if you look back in, early 20th century, you'll find, in mid 20th century, you'll find the issue of redlining, how redlining isolated the areas in which Black people could live. And then you talk about corporations and their role in that, and how corporations refuse to give loans to Black folks. And these weren't just Black folks who couldn't afford to own a home. These were Black folks who sometimes were wealthier or who had greater financial means than some whites who were given loans for homes. You talk about ghettos, and the term ghetto is kind of controversial in itself, but ghettos were created on purpose. And I'm not sure. I thought I heard somebody say they had a Jewish background here, but Jewish folk are very familiar with ghettos because they lived in quote unquote ghettos for a period of time in American history. But the ghettos that we think of today, those were created purposely by corporations and by government to isolate Black people in poor neighborhoods. And when Black folk decided to, or did what they could to get out of those systems and get into wealthier neighborhoods, you saw what was called white flight, and white people escaping those areas, not just escaping those areas, but escaping those areas to suburban areas and creating schools that their own children could go to, who could benefit from the wealth that they brought into those neighborhoods. So again, I don't want to go on too long. I definitely want to engage some more conversation on this stuff, but the underlying thing I wanted to give everyone is that everything that we see happening today is not an accident. It was done purposefully. It was done to give certain people an advantage and give certain people a disadvantage. And the only way you can attack those things and give Black people a chance at equity is to, again, purposefully attack the laws and institute policies that directly impact those people who were negatively affected before. oftentimes one of the things I hear the most when we talk about issues of race is including Black folks being killed by cops in general. And let me digress for 1 second and say this. In the Black community, there is generally no difference between a Black cop and a white cop. And oftentimes you will hear Black people anecdotally joke that they are more likely to be treated fairly and kindly by a white cop than some of the Black cops they encounter. Now that's anecdotal. I have no evidence to prove whether or not that's true. In my personal experience, I've experienced that as well, but I don't think that's something you can, rest your hat on. But people bring up this topic of Black on Black crime, and we're all upset about white cops killing Black bodies, but we don't talk about the Black people killing other Black people. There's no such thing as Black on Black crime, just like there's no such thing as white on white crime or Latin on Latin crime. Although all those categories happen at a proportionately similar rate. The fact is, people commit crimes where they live. And typically, we live in communities where people like us live. So if you commit a crime, if I'm Black and I live in a Black neighborhood, more than likely I'm going to commit a crime, if I do, against somebody who looks like me. If I'm white and I live in a white neighborhood, more than likely I'm going to commit a crime against somebody who looks like me, a white person. If I'm Mexican and I live in a Mexican community, more than likely those crimes will be committed against people who are Mexican. So when people bring up this idea that Black on Black crime is a problem in America, yes, we don't want Black folks killing other Black folks, but it's no different than what's happening in any other segregated community in America. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation as well.
Awesome. I feel like that last point is huge. I'm very glad you added that. Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I personally am enlightened, and I feel like all these things, I may be considered Black, I may call myself Black, but it's, people ask, well, why this or why that? Why do people think that? People that are classified as Black or classify themselves Black people all have different opinions. Some vote Republican, some vote, Democratic, whatever it is. Some live in cities, some live on farms. They're very different perspectives. So there's no one Black voice as well. But there is very, very much truth in what Jonathan says, that if a Black doctor is driving down the street, he may be the head of a hospital, whatever it is, he will be treated and can be likely treated differently and much differently than a white criminal. And so regardless of that, regardless of his perspective, regardless of his opinions, the world looks at people differently. So that was a lot. I know each of us probably digested different points from what you shared at a different rate, Jonathan. Thank you. So what I wanted to start with is really, what do you know? And I think, Jonathan, you shared a lot of what we know, what I believe are facts.
Some people often think that because that wealth gets you sort of out of the circle. So there's two stories that have always resonated with me. One is actually very, very recent. One dealing with police. Dee Brown, who was an all-star for the Boston Celtics for some time, lived in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Wellesley is one of the richest municipalities per capita in the entire country. He was pulled over 5 minutes from his home and harassed by police officers, even though he's a multi-million-dollar NBA superstar, making, and former dunk champion, known across the country for his athletic ability. Even he was stopped and harassed by Black people. And you mentioned the Black doctor, and not in the same context that I'm going to mention this. Black people have a disproportionate, or let me say this differently. Black people have a unique experience in medicine. Serena Williams comes to mind immediately when you said Black doctor, because Serena Williams almost died on the table after giving birth. Because when Black people tell doctors that they're in pain, there's a study that found that black doctors often assume that, sorry, not black doctors, that doctors assume that black people can tolerate pain more than white folks. And so they don't take pain issues from black people as seriously as they do to others. Serena Williams, one of, if not the greatest athlete in American history, almost died on the table because her doctors would not believe that she was having serious issues after her pregnancy. And if not for being a completely unbelievable advocate for her own medical health, we would without one of the greatest athletes in the history of sports, because they just wouldn't believe her. And the only reason they wouldn't believe her was because she was a black woman, this black superstar even, but a black woman sitting on a table complaining about something that they just refuse to believe. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So I want to actually shift a little bit. And there's a lot of information, a lot of data. But I want to turn it back inside kind of to where we started and to a conversation. And I want to ask you, how do you, everyone here, how do you feel? Based on what you've heard, based on what's going on, how do you personally feel? Because that, again, is a fact. So, feel free to share.
And I'm angry and I'm disappointed at the same time. And yeah, I don't know. I'll just start there. Very angry, very disappointed. Like hearing about a simple fact like some of the origins of the police force in the US, I'm kind of shocked at myself that I didn't know that information already. I'm disappointed that, in this country that we live in, that's just typical of the information that we hide from our own society because we don't want to face the realities. And I'm disappointed at the fact that that type of information is what would equalize, I think, halfway intelligent people across our country and help to drive towards, I don't know, eliminating all of these fictitious, preconceived notions that have been, that have been ingrained in our society and perpetuated for so long. So I guess that's what makes me upset and disappointed.
I want to give a small example, exaggerated example. One of the things that happened to the youth here in Minnesota, and that is that the police would take in youth, and this is my exaggeration, for stealing a candy bar and offer them saying, we will charge you with a felony and you can go home or put you in jail now. So we've got a lot of youth that are registered with felonies that have never seen jail.
I'll take that a step further. And I don't know if so there are two, I know sometimes some people don't prefer to read and prefer to watch things. There are two shows that I would strongly suggest folks watch if they want to become more informed. The first is 13th by, I think both these are by Ava DuVernay, but the 13th, which talks about the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery, how it actually didn't fully abolish slavery. And the other one is When They See Us. And to your point, taking a step further, there are so many times where Black folk have been arrested and been arraigned, and either they didn't commit the crime or the crime really wasn't that serious, but prosecutors will scare them into accepting a plea bargain by telling them if they don't, they'll go to jail for some inordinate amount of time. Now, these are Black folk who don't know anything about the law, don't know anything about their rights as citizens, and the prospect of going to jail for 5 years is much more a dark thing for them than going to jail for, say, 1 year. A lot of them grew up in communities where they knew people who went to jail who did a 1-year bid and came back and were fine. But what they don't realize also is that going to jail or accepting that plea bargain means you're becoming a felon. And once you become a felon, you lose your right to vote. you lose job opportunities in your communities. And nowadays, in some instances, you even lose the ability to go to college and get federal funding. So these small things that are done on a policy level have a tremendous impact on the ability for you to just simply live.
I think what I've been struggling with this week, and I've shared this with Darnell before too, is just this overwhelming sense of hopelessness, because these systems are so interconnected and deeply entrenched in our society, and they feed off of each other so, voraciously, that to, see a path of disentangling them and affecting change. I know that it can be done. It's just overwhelming when you do hear all these facts back to back, and think about how they continuously affect people, Black people. And I would say, the one emotion that I don't typically feel with all these facts is surprised. I feel that I've, anecdotally and through reading and just studies, that I've known about many of these issues and systems for so long. And, I'm glad that there's space for conversation right now around them, and thinking about how to actually affect change in our communities and society.
I feel like a lot of this information. Thank you so much again for sharing that information. That's it's super enlightening. I know I was writing notes the whole time, and it's like, I need to look up what this means. I like phrases that seem so available to someone else, or things that I've never heard of sometimes. And so I'm writing things down that I can look up later. So thank you for that. Also, just some of these numbers and things that have been talked about today, but then also, like Brianna's saying, over the past week and a half, it's like, okay, why didn't I know about this? It does feel a little bit like, if I were to explain the feeling, like it does feel a little bit like I'm drinking out of a fire hose. And I want more of it, but it's hard to capture all of it. But my inclination is to take some kind of positive or life applicable takeaway from it. What can I do? And I think really what this is stirring me to is, well, don't try to fix it all at one time. Don't try to take all of it on for myself. Don't think that I have that ability as an individual. But what I do have the ability to do is take a step every single day, and wake up every morning and say, every day, okay, today I'm going to watch 13th, today I'm going to read this, today I'm going to phone a friend, and it's because I realized that it wasn't something that was taught to me every day growing up. And so if I'm going to educate myself, I need to choose every day to re-educate myself.
I appreciate that, Samantha. That's a great perspective to have. That take this conversation. This is not the end. This is just a spark that should start your digging, start your self-education, start your change of perspective, start the effect that you have. So absolutely. Other feelings.
For me, while I was listening to that, I just felt so ashamed. Sorry, I don't know. the fact that you brought up that oftentimes on TV, a lot of the youth are not in the Black community are not able to see someone that inspires them, especially back then. That was really shocking to me, and I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, and up till now, even though I'm a graduating senior, I've never really been aware of these issues. And it just makes me feel ashamed that why didn't I educate myself with this? How come I didn't know these things? But just having someone fully open these things, like open my eyes, like it just feels so new and I feel so vulnerable. Um, I think ever since these protests have started, my timeline on social media, um, the news have been just flooded with all sorts of information. I was talking to Darnell about this, and you kind of just get overwhelmed and you don't find a sense of right or wrong. Like, for example, you see the crowds being tear gassed, but then the next slide is like a cop kneeling down with like a Black person and like offering them rose. Like, you don't know what to think anymore because everything is so biased. But finally being able to know the foundation and having like my own sense of thought, that is really powerful. And like and as like some of these people have said, like I feel really just frustrated and like disappointed. Um, but like I'm so thankful to like be here and have this community talk to you, like so many diverse people, and just understand. So thank you.
Katie, how much exposure have you gotten to the Asian history in California?
You know, most of it has been from where I've grown up. This house, my mom, she moved here. When did you move here?
1995.
Yeah, so much of my history revolves around my family, but I feel like our world is still really opening up to this culture, to every single culture. And although I know it's a lot better than it used to be, there's still a lot of holes to be closed in. But I'm lucky to have such close ties to my heritage, like right next to me, my role model, my family. That's where I get most of my information. That's how I've been educating myself. But beyond that, I don't really know.
There was an internment in California of Asians. You're aware of that?
Yes, I did a research project on that last year, the Japanese internment. I think a lot of the times, I think especially for the youth, you kind of just either block it out or you just let it hit really hard, and it's so hard to talk about it at times. But the thing is, like, it needs to be talked about because so many people are uneducated about this. Like, I just feel so ashamed that I never took the extra step. Why didn't I do that for the people who are suffering right now?
Or you're taking steps now, and that hopefully is setting you up to take steps going forward. And I just want to touch on one thing that you said, Katie, which is bias. And I had somebody contact me and ask me about a perspective of Black Lives Matter. And the question was, well, I went to the website and it says dismantle the police or defund the police. And she asked, well, why do you think that? Why do you want to dismantle the police? Don't they protect? Don't they provide some service? Don't they protect us? And the first thing I had to say is that that's one person who created that website's perspective. That is not Black people's perspective. That is not my perspective. That's not even something I've ever heard of before. And so there's bias. Every news clip that you see of white people walking peacefully and then Black people breaking windows, that was done purposefully. and you may not see it. And I'm a photographer. I edit videos. There's little clips that I can create a perspective. And the media can create a perspective that you don't even consciously realize is being given to you. Oh, well, I see 500 white people walking together, but then I see 5 black people breaking windows, and they'll show the black people breaking windows for 10 minutes, but they'll pop onto this, peaceful walking or whatever it is. So there's bias everywhere. And so it may be something that's attributed. Why do black people believe that? Why are black people this way? Well, you have to understand that wherever you hear that from or wherever you heard that from, that might be one person. And the person that owns that website and created that website may likely not be black. So I can go buy Black Lives Matter. I can go buy Indian Lives Matter, whatever it is, and put whatever perspective is there. And so be careful what you do and what you believe. And that's why this conversation, I'm trying to tie it to what we personally know. Because for us to believe in the facts, because for us to believe and hear, oh, well, I saw this and I heard this and they're protesting about this. What is Black Lives Matter? Well, it is not, there's no central organization or unified voice of what Black Lives Matter means. So anything and everything that you said is independent individuals with their own agenda and perspectives and biases. So I think you touched on something very important, Katie, that we have to be careful of the information that we believe, the information that we act on, and so on and so forth.
When I was 17 years old, and I'll never forget this because it was the day before I took my SATs. I was a junior in high school, and for some odd reason, I decided to take my SATs early. As most people up here probably know, as a junior, you typically take your PSATs, the practice SATs. But I decided, hey, I want to be an overachiever. So I decided to take my SATs early. On March 31st, 95, I went to the movies with my brother's girlfriend and this girl that I was kind of feeling. And we went to go see Major Payne, the Damon Wayans movie. We came out of the theater. My brother's girlfriend was calling for a ride for us to come pick us up. Me and the other girl were kind of just like playing around on the sidewalk. Street Fighter was a huge game at that time, and we were sort of making like the Ayukin sound that Ryu and one of the other characters makes. And a police officer kind of stumbled upon us out of nowhere, and he said, "You're getting in the way of traffic. You need to hurry up and do what you got to do over here and get away from here." And I looked, and it was towards the end of the afternoon, early evening. There was nobody really around at all. It was empty. It was a weekday. I mean, a Friday, but it was pretty empty at the time. And I didn't see anybody. So I was wondering, like, why are you over here bothering us? Fast forward, I'm talking back and forth to him. At one point in time, he just got frustrated, and he said, "You need to shut up. Y'all need to get out of here right now. Whoever she's on the phone with, she needs to get off the phone right now. Y'all need to leave the area." So my friends, realizing that I was passionately frustrated by the situation and knowing how conscious I was of our rights, just told me, let's go. And they kind of yanked me to leave. So we started walking away. I was so frustrated but willing to leave that I sort of was blocking out what was going on around me. The two of them actually entered into an arcade that was along the path we were walking without me knowing, and they yelled to me. And so I turned around and I saw them. They said, "Come, let's go in here." So I turn around to go to where they are. The policeman actually just appears out of nowhere again next to me. He says, "Where do you think you're going?" I said, "I'm going into the arcade with them." He says, "No, you're not," and grabs me, throws me up against a brick mortar wall, bruising my shoulder, arrests me, put me in handcuffs, and I'm livid at this point in time, telling him he can't do this. You're violating my rights. I didn't do anything wrong. And so he got so frustrated with me rejecting what was happening to me that after tightening the bracelets, he clicked them tighter to the next level or whatever, bruising my wrist. I sat on the curb, I think, for about 45 minutes waiting for a police car to come, with all these people, looking on at this black kid sitting on the streets. And then finally I'm arrested. I go to the local jail. This is before cell phones, and my mom had gone out for the weekend and nobody could reach her. So I actually spent the night in jail. My mom came home and picked me up the next morning and got to my SATs 10 minutes late. And thankfully, was still able to take them. But this incident with Floyd has triggered me in a way, because I think back to that incident and I realize that could have easily been me, but for the grace of God and this guy, for whatever reason, not escalating it to the next level. I could have been either brutally beaten because I was resisting arrest, or I could have been killed because of my black mouth and the things that I said to him, because I knew he was violating my rights. So, sometimes we hear these stories about what's going on. We see them on TV, and some people think, oh, that's not, it doesn't happen to real people. That's just a once in a blue moon type of thing. It happens. It happens to real people. It happened to me. I've definitely been profiled in Wellesley, Massachusetts, ironically as well. So these are real incidents that happen to real people. And thankfully for me, I made it out without any issue. But what hurt me even more was we sued the police department and sued that officer. And a jury of my peers looked at him and looked at me and said he didn't do anything wrong. Even though they had evidence of my bruising on my shoulder, of the bruising on my wrist, of the fact that I was where I was supposed to be and didn't commit any crimes, they looked at him and said, oh, he was just doing his job. He did a great job. And so that's a trauma that I live with every single day. And when I'm driving down the street, like I was, I want to say 3 years ago, and I get pulled over by the police with my son in the back, and a cop comes to me and says, the reason I pulled you over is because you crossed over the line on the shoulder where your car isn't supposed to go. And I know for a fact that if I did cross over that line, it was probably by an inch or less. That feeling that I had from those incidents lives with me from this day forward. And it gives me an added level of fear for my son and my daughter when they get old enough to drive a car, whether or not they're going to encounter situations like that where somebody's going to look at them and believe they have the right to do whatever they want and treat my son and my daughter any way they want just because we're black.
Jonathan, would you mind sharing what city you grew up in, where that was?
Waterbury, Connecticut.
Just to add a little color and just to show that this was a knife edge case, Jonathan, that you described. Jonathan was going to take his SAT. Jonathan eventually went on to MIT and graduated from MIT. That one incident could have prevented him from taking that SAT. And it could have prevented him from going to MIT. And that's how razor thin the situations are. Thankfully, he was able to continue on his life and achieve those things. But that all could have been taken away from him by that one incident.
Darnell, I've never even added that perspective, and I'm getting kind of emotional right now because you reminded me of something based on what you just said. MIT wrote me a letter after I took those SATs my junior year because they were surprised at the fact that I took the SATs as a junior and I did so well. If not for that letter from MIT as a junior in high school, I would have never thought about MIT. I would have never applied to MIT. So what you just said is so salient that it's making me emotional because I've never even contemplated that connection. But in reality, I really, if I had done poorly on that SAT because of what happened the day before, or if the SAT proctor had said to me, "Hey, you're 10 minutes late, so you can't take the SAT," I would have never been at MIT. I would have never made it there.
That's real.
Jonathan, I just want to say that I believe you. I want to confess that I have been in situations in the past where I have tried to play devil's advocate when I've heard stories like yours, and I believe you.
Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you for sharing, brother. I feel you. Had a similar situation when I was 17. Got pulled over. It's an off-duty cop on his way home. Saw me driving. Tossed my car. Made me 2.5 hours late for work. Almost lost my summer job. Put the handcuffs on. Gave him the full description of the police officer. I have family members that work for the police force, and they made excuses for him. Oh, you were in the wrong. I wasn't in the wrong. I wasn't speeding. I was actually going 5 miles under because I was trying to slow down so I could get off the exit, and they got me. Tossed my car, left me there, sitting there, the humility of it, just everyone driving past you. 17 years old, first time I ever had that interaction with the police, and just scarred me forever. Now, every time you see those cops, every time you see those lights, your heart just starts beating. I've been in the military for almost 20 years, deployed countless times, fought for the country. I have done more things than I ever care to admit. Point of the matter is that being stationed in the South, I'm currently in South Carolina. I was in Georgia prior to this, or North Carolina prior to this, then Georgia. I've been in the South for the vast majority of my career, and I hit it every time I'm driving, every time I see it. Move it away. It doesn't matter that I wear this uniform. They see it, and the second that they turn me, second I take it off, I'm just another brown dude. What you doing, man? And it's hard when you come back and you spend 6 months away from your family and you're seeing your friends get killed and you're coming back, and I'm messed up. I suffer from PTSD, and then the struggle of coming back and having the same cops that are just like, oh, the next first day they see me in uniform, thank you. The next day they see me without uniform, treating me completely different. This doesn't define me. This flag, sorry, wrong side. This flag means the world to me. But often, as a black dude in this society, it's hard because you lose yourself, and you know your rights. Your rights don't matter. And once again, I'm mixed. I'm Native, I'm white, I'm black, I'm confused. All lives matter. True, real talk. But we're suffering right now. Black lives are suffering. And we don't get it twisted. Us as a black community, we suffer with our own right. Sometimes we wonder if our lives really matter to each other. But police brutality is a real damn thing. And it's hard that sobering pill, no matter how great of an individual you are, to a cop, sometimes you're just a nigga on the street. And a lot of people don't realize that, and you're never gonna see it. You know, we can tell you till we're blue in the face, but it's crazy when you think about how many times this stuff happens and someone's not there with that cell phone. How many times is that not getting checked? I can't even imagine. You got cops right now blacking out their cameras, their body cams, their footage. Unless something happens that's reported and proven, you don't see it. So the frustration of this, and it's just not George Floyd. You got Brian Tyler. Yeah, I mean, we can go down the list of names and the effects on the whole community. I'm married to a white woman. Granted, we're getting divorced, but I'm married to a white woman. My son is fair-skinned. There are times when I thank God that my son is fair-skinned, that he doesn't have to struggle the way that I had to struggle, the way that my uncles had to struggle, the way my dad had to struggle. Like, that's real talk. And that's not by design. It's just I don't want him to fear for his life like I have to. So thank you for sharing, Jonathan. I appreciate
Can I say something real quick? First of all, thank you so much for your service, bro, because it means a tremendous amount to me. My mom was in the Army, and she got in a bad car accident, and so she had to leave the Army. But my brother was in the Air Force, so military service means a great deal to me. You guys make it easy for me to put my head on my pillow at night and sleep comfortably. So thank you so much for your service. Something you said resonated with me, and I want to sort of segue into a current issue that we're having or that people are noticing. That's the issue of Drew Brees and his statement recently about Colin Kaepernick and his protest. One of the reasons Drew Brees said that he will never respect somebody who doesn't stand for the flag, or that he'll never kneel for the flag and disrespect the flag, was he noted that his grandparents and great grandparents, or I think grandparents, served in World War II. And a lot of Black people collectively laughed at that comment because most of us are aware of the fact that there were Black people who served during World War II and fought on those wars. And after fighting in those wars, they came back to a country where they still couldn't be free. So, and I wanted to segue that into the conversation about Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, because one, Kaepernick's protest wasn't against the flag. He was standing up against or protesting what we're talking about today, police brutality. And he just decided to do that during the national anthem. Had nothing to do with the flag, disrespecting the flag. He actually spoke to somebody in the military who asked him to come off the bench and kneel instead of sitting on the bench during the flag. So that's the first bit of facts. But when people talk about all lives matter and blue lives matter, and this is touching on what you mentioned as well, it's not that anybody doesn't believe that police officers' lives don't matter, that firemen's lives don't matter, that military lives don't matter, that white lives don't matter, that Asian lives don't matter. Of course, we believe all lives matter. But at this moment in time, matter of fact, for the last 400 and something years, the fact is that people of color, and particularly Black people, haven't lived a life where it seems like their lives matter. So it's in the best analogy I've seen to date is, let's say all houses matter and your house is on fire. Is it okay for me to get my fire hose and hose down my nicely clean house, no flames coming out of it, while your house burns down? No. Your house is on fire. Your house needs the attention. Black Lives Matter is not a message that says no other lives matter. It's a message that says there's something that's happening to Black and brown people, and we'd like everyone to focus on that so we can get rid of this issue.
We just want our lives to matter as much
as everybody else's.
As much. That's it.
I think we've had an amazing conversation, and I'd go to say that anyone of color, anyone that is not fully identified as white, there's some people that on one day you might be considered white, on another day you might be considered Black. I've been in those situations as well with the same person, depending on the context, depending on what it is that they're considered. I would say that everyone is going to have a story. Roger, you shared a story. Jonathan, you shared a story. I have my own story. I want to touch on one aspect of this, and then I want to transition to as we kind of get later in time. Is I want to touch on what I consider reverse racism. I've experienced things like you, Roger, and Jonathan. I personally have experienced being profiled or picked out. But I've also experienced something different in the fact that I have an MIT degree. I have an MBA from Berkeley High School of Business. I've worked at Intel. I've worked at other major companies around the country. I speak German. I speak Spanish. I've been to 40 countries. I work with billionaires, typically in a room of 40 multi millionaires and billionaires. It's rich old white men and me. And so the perspective is, oh, well, you're Darnell. We see you. And almost to the point that if someone were to ask me, Darnell, where are you from? If I were to say I was black, they'd almost discredit that. And one of the terms that I feel is almost more racist than what you might have said, Roger, is what can be classified as a term Oreo. Black on the outside, white on the inside. Because in a room full of white billionaires, they say, well, the blackness is just skin deep. The rest of you is white, so you're okay with us. And what that is doing, maybe unconscious to them or unconscious to even anyone on this conversation, is they're basically attributing all of the acceptable parts of who I am to them, to whiteness. And anything, if I were to step out of line, is being attributed to my blackness. So if I came dressed differently, they'd say, oh, that's the black guy. But he's in here with us. Darnell, you're one of us. You never have to worry about anything. If you ever need anything from us, you're one of ours. But your MIT degree, your Haas degree, your resume, your experience, we're gonna take all that for our own. We don't want that to be. We don't want anyone in the black community to be able to claim. And I think that is a very sad point, that perspectives that we may consciously do that say, oh yeah, he's a doctor, he's brown, but he's a doctor, so I'm gonna let you be brown, and I'm not gonna acknowledge that. So think about those perspectives. All of that said, so much to think about. Take those things, munge on them. But I want to spend this last couple minutes or whatever that we have to Samantha's point. Where can we go from there? And I want to ask, what does right look like?
Darnell, real quick, the term that is used for someone like you is the exceptional Negro, right? It's how Joe Biden described Barack Obama as clean and articulate when they were running for president together, right? When Joe Biden was a candidate for president along with Barack Obama. It's the fact that you're different than the rest of those other black people, and so you're exceptional in some way. And I'm sorry that you've had to deal with that, bro. I'm definitely, because I've not been in the situations you've been in. I've felt that from folks in our own community. And I felt that from other folks like you have, but not at that level. And I know how painful that is to look at yourself or to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, what I see is not acceptable to people, but what they see through my blackness is acceptable to them. And that's just not cool at all.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I've similar to you, I had an epiphany at some point, Jonathan, and everyone, that in most of those cases, I never saw the prejudice and never saw myself being, discriminated against because I was in the room. But what I didn't realize is I wasn't being discriminated against, but everyone else that looked like me was. And that's what makes my heart heavy, is that, maybe if Jonathan were to walk in the room with me, they would say, oh, Darnell, it's so nice of you to bring one of your friends. It's a perspective of, oh, well, you're one of us, but we don't know about him because he looks like you, but we haven't qualified him yet. Let's move to the topic of, what does right look like? What can you do? What do you do how do we correct? And what does correct look like? Based on what you think, what you heard, what your ideas are.
You know, one of the things that we had talked about before was like the black policeman. The key is that in certain situations, when he's in the street with other police, his rightness is in the eyes of those other policemen, where he wouldn't be doing that if he wasn't trying to appeal to what other folks thought was right. So he can be more volatile and violent because he's looking at the wrong right.
Yeah.
I know there's so much more to be said, and even comments on what we. But let's think about like what are some solutions? What are some steps forward? What does that look like? Is your
So
thoughts?
in the chat, I posted a couple of resources for folks who want to be more informed, and I've heard and found that actually doing things towards that end helps you understand things a lot more. So there's a sort of challenge called a 21-day challenge by Dr. Eddie Moore, where you take actions every day to understand systemic racism, from reading things to having discussions with people, to self-reflection. There's a host of things you do during this 21-day challenge that helps you get more of an insight into these issues. And I left another resource. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I think some things that we can do, action steps that we can take, is especially for white folks, is to, one, get an understanding of what this stuff is. Two, listen to and believe black folk when they tell you about their experience. One of my white friends said to me made a Facebook post last year. She said, anytime she goes to the voting booth and there's a qualified black person or person of color running for an office, or a woman running for office, if there's no person of color, she will vote to put that person into office. Because one of the only ways we can start to achieve equity is if the people in the room making the decisions reflect the people who those decisions affect. So when you go and vote in elections, get to know the black and Latino and Asian and Indian candidates who are running. Get to know what their policies are. They don't necessarily need to be the most qualified person there, but as long as they're qualified enough to get the job done, give them a chance so they can start having an impact on their communities. Invest in the black experience. If there are black owned grocery stores in your neighborhood or somewhere near where you live, or black owned businesses, patronize them. Put money in black people's pockets so that they can start to develop the economic wealth that helps them advance in their lives. There are black-owned banks in the United States. There's one in California that's also in Massachusetts. It's an online bank. Put money into those black banks so that they can reinvest that money into their communities. There are a lot of small steps that people can take that have a tremendous impact on the lives of black people. And I think one of the greatest things that we can do moving forward is to really start investigating this issue of police brutality and the immunity granted police that allows them to say, if they fear for their lives, that they can do anything that they want. Investigate why that's there and what we can do to eliminate it, because I think there are proposals on Capitol Hill to take that right away from police officers. And I'll leave with this, something that I say that's very, very controversial. I think most people have a hard time swallowing this. But if it comes down to an innocent person losing their life or a police officer losing their life, the police officer has to lose their life because he signed up for a very difficult job, and he has to hold himself to a standard that an innocent person shouldn't be required to do. You know, his job is a tough job, and I give it up for police officers. But just like Mr. Kemp, the military gentleman, when he goes into battle, he knows there are rules of engagement he has to follow. He can't just go out there carte blanche doing anything he wants to, because the chance that he may take an innocent life is more important than his own life, and that's why he's sacrificing his life to support our American values. In our country, innocent life is valued, and so if a police officer has the inkling that that person may be innocent, he should never be able to jump to conclusion that he's able to take that person's life and do it with impunity. So we have to start fighting that issue, and that will change a lot in this country.
I actually have had a very interesting experience. I actually went to school with Darnell and Jonathan. And after graduating from MIT with 2 degrees, I worked for Raytheon for a year, and I was on a gifted track. I got a promotion and raise in 9 months. And if I would have stayed, I'm sure I probably would have been at least an executive or somewhere in there. But I left to go get my master's degree in public policy, where I studied issues of inequality extensively. After I left graduate school, life happened. I got a divorce, and I decided to get back into corporate America. And my experience at that point in time was that I was systematically railroaded in a multitude of ways. One of which was I had a headhunter contact me about a digital marketing position and said that it's advertised at 90,000, but we could put you in at 60. And I told him that when you can put me in where my experience is valued at the price, at the salary that is advertised, then I will go for it. So I think one of the reasons why there's such a lack of diversity in corporate America, a lack of representation, is it's not a lack of talent. It's definitely not a lack of talent. It has to do with the fact that there is a black tax that I have suffered from. My dad has suffered from. He's a computer scientist, and there's been so many scenarios where this actually happened to me. A white boy with no college education became my boss, and I had to report to him with 3 degrees. That's only possible in a white supremacist system. The United States is not a meritocracy. And if it was, we would not be having this conversation right now. And I think one of the things that could help to mitigate the inequality that we see, it'll take 400 years for Black America as a whole to catch up to parity with white Americans. Now, when you look at slavery and the history of the intellectual property and labor that has been stolen, the compensation, I don't see why not every Black person I know who gets an education and has worked hard shouldn't be a trust fund baby. Like I don't see why that is not a common occurrence. And the only reason why that is not a common occurrence is because the labor and everything's been stolen. So I think as allies, one thing that has to happen is people who are in the room making those decisions need to stand up for people and stand up for what is right. Because a lot of these companies, there's this one white guy, I forget the name of the company, but his base salary for all his starting employees is $60,000 a year. Now this dude, I don't know, it's a payment processing company, I forget the exact name, but he's been making a lot of waves and everything else because he's paying his people a generous wage. And our capitalistic society is fine and good, but it's not theoretically and reality are not the same. In theory, it works. But in reality, when you have a situation where a woman who had no social life in high school, went to MIT, can build a website from scratch, HTML, Java, what you want, I can do it. And this white boy with no college education became my boss. And, I was told to sit in a corner and this, that, and the other. I quit. I left. And, as a member, my company as a member of the LA South Chamber, I'm asked constantly to show up as a leader in the marketing space. So when you're as a Black person, when you are in corporate America, and you live in an environment, you're working in an environment with microaggressions, macroaggressions, with an environment of redlining, you have less money to do, you have to perform at a higher level than your colleagues for less money, plus you have a higher rate of living because of mortgage rates and everything. You have a perfect storm for mental health crises and stress. It is a miracle that this country is standing.
Z, I only have one thing to say, and that is my top 3 bosses didn't have degrees, and I had one. So, you know.
Not that guy who was my boss, I would not even hire him to talk to someone like, if I gave you a list of my clients, like some of the big marketing firms, like Neil Patel and others would love to have my clients. I don't have just little mom and pop. No, I actually have internationally known brands, people who have impact, and I drive their marketing and business strategy. So I think, you know, as far as we're all concerned, we need to stop gaslighting people. Stop playing these mental games. Like, white America has gaslighted the hell out of Black Americans. And I'm just not for it. I'm not for it at all. And I think, you know, Black people, on the other hand, have Stockholm syndrome. It's like so many of us tiptoe around white people's feelings. It's like, I don't care about anybody's feelings. Like, if I cared about people's feelings, I would not be where I'm at right now. Because you cannot handhold evil. You cannot coddle evil. You cannot tolerate or make excuses for evil. You just can't do it. Like, I remember when I was sitting with my crew, my employees, I had a clear conduct statement for anyone who I work with. Putting people down, being disrespectful, being dishonest, being unprofessional, none of that is tolerated. None is not tolerated. And we need to have a zero tolerance for that. And a lot of these companies, from Amazon to Texaco to Adidas, oh my gosh, it's like the stories I hear.
Throw in for a quick minute. Maybe this is valuable for some people and less for others, but the one thing I keep thinking of, to the point of like, what can you do, is I have, my dad's a police officer. He was for like 35 years. So we have a lot of discussion when things come to the forefront, and things that have been going on lately. But I mean, it's constantly going on. But I feel like, you know, not only getting informed, but I think the goal has to be to get a level of information, and you got to hold people around you accountable. I mean, at least personally for me, I float between groups of people who will say things in front of me that maybe they wouldn't say if my friend Darnell were in the room. And it's on me to hold myself to a high standard and hold those people accountable, you know, for what they do, because there's a lot of people involved in everything that's going on. You know, it's Black people, it's white people, for what those words mean. It's, you know, multiracial. There's just all these people, and it's not good enough to get on a call like this and hear our friends and gain information. You got to make the change. And for me, like, can I make a big change? Am I going to host a protest? No, but can I make sure that every person that I meet, the way they act and conduct themselves around me, I'm going to make sure that there's a standard, and that's what I can do to spread it. So I'm a little worked up and passionate about it too, but I feel like that's the obligation as a human being on the planet to take action in that way. And I think it can be scary sometimes, because you can be afraid, like, am I going to be the other now? And am I going to start to be treated like that? Are those people going to move away, or is that going to change the dynamic in the workplace? And you just got to come to terms with it. That doesn't matter. What matters is, you know, doing the right thing, taking action, keeping ourselves accountable. So I don't want to take up too much time here at the end.
No, well, we're a couple minutes over. I appreciate the conversation. I hope everyone took something from this conversation. But the reality is, this conversation has absolutely zero value if you don't do something. Like if you want to throw away an investment, it would be walking away from this conversation and not changing something that you've been doing. You just spent 2 hours being enlightened, given the opportunity to do something, do that. And, there's the idea of a white savior or whatever it is, but you know what? Help black people. And somebody says, well, I don't know if I should go hold a sign or if I should donate to a website or whatever it is. And I say, do something that you can do, don't hand money or hand responsibility to someone else to do it.
In the chat, I put in a resource. One of my clients has a intensive, and it's the intersection for mankind. It's called Heal Thyself, and it's a diversity intensive where people can really do a deep dive into how white supremacy has affected them from a multi-dimensional perspective. And then the Supreme Love Project, I personally went through that. And that's founded by Dr. Janine Staples, who's a tenured professor at Penn State University. She wrote Revelations of Asher, which I think is a pretty awesome multidimensional study of humanity. And it gives you a lot of tools on how to be more self-possessed and aware and more effective.
Thank you. So click on those links because once the Zoom is closed, it can go away. So click on them now. I'll try to get them out in whatever extent I can. But again, do something, educate, continue to educate, have an impact, affect other people around you that aren't educated. And I say, what can you do? I was a volunteer at a predominantly black inner city school. Go volunteer, go teach, give yourself something where there's nothing between you and the impact. Listen to people, socialize. The idea is do something with you and the resources that you have to directly impact and affect. And maybe that's as simple as Jonathan said, go buy something from a black owned store, put your money in a black owned bank. Those things ultimately come around. But hopefully you've started to change your perspectives. And honestly, even as a black man, my perspectives are warped. It's so systemic that my perspectives are warped. Yes. I can be guilty of looking at black people, black men in the wrong way. So we all are affected by it. It's so terrible. We all need to work on it. We all need to change our perspectives. We all need to do something. And if one of the things I know that when I'm in the trenches helping someone that I may have had a poor perspective of, when I'm volunteering with black high school kids, the fear starts to go away and the pain starts to fill my heart. And I realize these are kids that I used to always start my high school tutoring sessions, and I was a teacher as well, with, do you have a pencil? We can't start a session without a pencil. Mm-hmm. That was where the bar started. And these are I was teaching high school math. So those things you start to see when you get in those trenches, and don't just go help one day, this weekend, tomorrow, whatever it is. Make a life decision to have an impact on this world. And I'll just say this, that holding a sign, some people may say, well, holding a sign doesn't have value. But all those people holding signs, they may have catalyzed this conversation. Yeah. And so that brings people start to see that's newsworthy. That may be just enough to make somebody else ask, what is all this about? Let me watch 13th. Let me go to Netflix. Let me do something. Let me learn something. So maybe it's a small thing like holding a sign. And you say, all those people are wasting their time. They're going to go home tomorrow and it's not having an impact. But at least all of you here may have been impacted and moved by some of those signs to come and sit here and listen to a 2-hour conversation. participate into our conversation. So I thank you for your time. And again, this is Life School Better Today. And the idea is that we all come together and we are all better today, and we have a plan to be better tomorrow. So please continue to participate in Life School. Go to the website, register, and we'll continue to grow to make this place better and make you better.